I'm Jared Signor, and I did my project on the effectiveness of mask wearing and social distancing on COVID-19 spread. Some background on COVID-19 is that it is a contagious respiratory and vascular disease. It is caused by severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus 2, or SARS-CoV-2. It was originally found in Wuhan, China, and it mainly spreads through the exhalation of respiratory droplets and aerosols of an infected individual. The method I used to model the spread of COVID-19 was an SEAIR model or an SLAIR model, and this includes equations for a susceptible population, a latent infection population, an infected population, an asymptomatically infected population, and a recovered population. And these equations you can see here on screen right now. Here is a table of all the parameters that my model takes into account. One important thing to note is that I chose to alter the infection rate when introducing mask wearing, social distancing, or both into the simulation. Here the infection rate is reduced by the effectiveness that social distancing or mask wearing has on reducing the spread of COVID-19. And you can see the values that they have for each of those different situations. Here is my compartmental diagram that I made for this model. As you can see from the latent infection, it splits off into asymptomatic infection and normal infection. This is determined by the asymptomatic infection rate, which is around 17.5%, and then both of those compartments converge back into the recovered compartment once the virus has passed. The results of my model were plotted over 1,000 days of simulated time, and for mask wearing I used a reduction rate of 67% to the infection rate, and I assumed that contact would be reduced by at least 25% for modeling the social distancing. Here is my baseline plot with no parameters altered. An important curve to look for is the infected population curve, which is green here, and it will be green on all the future plots as well. The peak infections of no restriction simulation was around 35% of the total population, and there was also a high number of total infections throughout the 1,000 day simulation. Next, we have the plot for social distancing being introduced into the population, reducing the infection rate by 25%. Here we can see that the infections peak at around 30% of the population, and there's still relatively high total infections throughout the simulation, but the total infections were reduced by around 8%, which is still an improvement. Here's the plot for mask wearing, assuming all members of the population are wearing a mask. We reduced the infection rate by around 67%. The peak infections here, you can see, are much lower than prior plots, with around 10% of the total population being the peak. The virus spread is much more controlled than it was otherwise, and this reduced the total number of infections by around 47%. Lastly, we have a plot of the population utilizing both mask wearing and social distancing. Here you can see the infected population is very negligible compared to prior plots, with the peak infections being at only around 6% of the total population. You can see that the virus is much more controlled over the 1,000 day period and will likely not be a big issue in the population. And there is a 68.9% reduction in total infections compared to the no restrictions model. And just to make it a little bit easier to visualize the infected curves, here we can see the infected curves for all four of the previously stated situations. And although here it looks like social distancing doesn't even have that big of an impact on the spread of the virus alone, when combined with mask wearing, it only amplifies the spread reduction and control of the virus So it is still a very important piece to reducing the spread. As for some of the factors that this model lacks, it does not take into account different age groups and the different, perhaps, immunodeficiencies or infection possibilities of those age groups, or spread possibilities, with younger kids probably being more likely to spread the virus as they're usually not as careful as adults or the elderly. The model also does not consider any of the population that will possibly refuse to wear a mask. It also does not include anything regarding deaths caused by the virus itself, so that could possibly have an impact on the spread, on those who are able to spread it. And lastly, the model does not vary when these spread-reducing measures are put into place, such as if you were to hit 100 cases at a college or maybe 100,000 cases in a state, then you implement the mask wearing. This model does not have that capability at the moment. So in conclusion, based on the model, it appears that social distancing and mask wearing together will have the biggest impact on reducing the spread of the virus and making it almost obsolete in the coming years, which it does not appear to be the case at this point in real life. Although with the release of the vaccine, hopefully we'll be okay. But regardless, as for now, just wear a mask and you'll be doing your part to drastically reduce the spread of COVID-19.